This is the Sermon Podcast from First Christian Church of Kokomo, Indiana for January 5th, 2020. Our community of faith gathers each Sunday morning at 9:30 a.m. for worship, and you will find us scattered throughout our community all week long, seeking to live out the way of Jesus. We hope you find these words encouraging and meaningful. This week, Pastor Nathan Day Wilson gives his thoughts on hope for all those who are hassled, hurried, or haggled.
This morning I'm going to read just two verses. They come from the Gospel according to Matthew, chapter 26. And they occur, just to give a little context, toward the end of Jesus' life when he and his disciples are on their way into Jerusalem. So Matthew chapter 26, I'll read verses 17, 18, and 19. On the first day of unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus, saying, "Where do you want us to make preparations for you to eat the Passover?" And he said back to them, "Go into the city to a certain person and say to him, 'The teacher says, my time is near. I will keep the Passover at your house with my disciples.'" So the disciples did as Jesus directed them, and they prepared the Passover meal. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. So we just finished Christmas, and I'm sure the Christmas story is familiar in your minds. I was thinking about it a little bit. There are two people in the Christmas story who don't come off so well. The obvious one is Herod. Okay, we all know that Herod was a scoundrel, a heel, a scumbag. He kind of had his own political motivations. He did have some legitimate pressures, but Herod, we never portray Herod in very good light. But the person I have in mind this morning is not Herod, but someone else who does not come off very well in the Christmas story. Any guesses? The innkeeper. Have you thought about that a little bit? Ever thought about the innkeeper's role in this story? And what if the innkeeper had been just a touch more generous than he was? What if, for instance, he gave his own room to this woman who was obviously very pregnant? If when she and the guy with her had come to the door and he had a full inn, he had paused for just a moment and said, but I've got an idea here. I don't have any rooms for you. I'm sorry about that. What the heck? I can take the couch tonight. Use my room instead. What if the innkeeper had been just a little more thoughtful, a little more generous? Now, don't get me wrong, okay? I want to be clear about this. I do not think the innkeeper was a mean person. I don't think there's evidence for that. I think the innkeeper was hurried. He was hassled. He was haggled. I mean, after all, he had all these people rushing to town all of a sudden because of all this talk about a census, right? His business probably went from, let's say 20% full to 120%, if that was a thing, full. Yeah? He was hurried, he was hassled, he was haggled. And I don't know about you, but the rumor is that sometimes I'm less generous than I could be when I'm stressed out, when I'm hurried and hassled and busy. Can I get a witness? Yeah, I thought that might be the case. Now, the innkeeper didn't have much time, like we said. He was busy. So I suspect that when he put this family, this woman about to give birth, this man with her, when he put them out in the stable, it might have been a bit of a relief for him, at least initially. And especially when those shepherds came by wanting to see this newborn baby, because you know what? Nothing can stink up a place like a bunch of shepherds can, right? My granddad used to say it's like a skunk out in the woodshed. I never wanted to experience a skunk trapped in the woodshed, but took his word for it. And then when the family left town and the authorities came rushing in, I'll bet the innkeeper for a moment was pretty darn happy that he had not let them into his place of business. But I wonder if the innkeeper ever realized his error. What do you think? Did the innkeeper ever know about the important turn in his life that he just barely missed? Did the innkeeper ever believe that the one others believed to be the Messiah was right there, only feet away from him in the stable? I don't know. Bible does not tell us so. But here's my dream for the innkeeper. And it's my dream, but they gave me the microphone and not you, so you have to listen to it. You may like my dream, you may not like my dream. It doesn't really matter to me. Here's my dream for the innkeeper. What might have happened for the innkeeper. I want to dream, I want to hope that, let's say 30 odd years later, the innkeeper was with his brother, and that over the time of those 30 years, he and his brother had opened a second inn in Bethlehem and maybe even a third one in Jericho, let's say. Again, it's my dream, not yours. And so they were prospering with this inn business, this hotel business. And with his proceeds, my dream is that the innkeeper finally fulfilled his lifelong hope of buying a house in Jerusalem. Why Jerusalem, you ask? Because Jerusalem was the heart of his faith. Jerusalem was where he, as a faithful, devout Jew, understood God to be most present. And so one night he's at his house in Jerusalem talking with a friend, and the friend asks him rather innocently if he has ever heard of this fellow that everybody's talking about these days, this Jesus of Nazareth. And the innkeeper replies, yes, I've heard of him. And so the friend goes on to talk a little bit about what he's heard and about how some believe that this guy is the Messiah, even though it's kind of different than what they thought the Messiah would be like. He was not a politician. He was a lowly, humble servant. He did not come riding on a horse and in wartime. And that friend said, by the way, just wondering, you may have heard this already, but just wondering. By the way, this fellow was born about 33 years ago. Get this. He was born about 33 years ago in a stable, surrounded by animals. Isn't that weird? And the innkeeper had one of those light bulb moments, you know? What did you say? Oh, the rumor is, the story is, I don't know, it's just a story, that he was born about 33 years ago in a stable, surrounded by animals, with, the things animals do. And the innkeeper thought for a second. Could it be? Could it be, 33 years ago, you say? Could it be OMG? There's a young mother, a fellow with her. There were these shepherds that came, angels, the magi. There was this really ridiculously bright star or something. And he began thinking back to the people and the events, and he began to wonder for the first time, could it be? And so, being the devout Jew that he was, the innkeeper remembers that while tragic events and errors remain tragic always, none of us has to live in pure tragedy. While tragic events always remain tragic, none of us has to live in pure tragedy, for no sin is beyond God's forgiveness. No sin is beyond God's redemption. And the innkeeper knows this because the innkeeper was devout. And so, my dream, the innkeeper sends a message. Get this to this person, Jesus. And the message is this: you can come anytime you need it to my house for a second time. I'm curious about this because in that passage I just read to you from Matthew, when Jesus and his disciples are on their way into Jerusalem, Jesus turns to his disciples and the disciples ask Jesus, where do we prepare the Passover? And he turns to them and he says, what? Did you catch that? Go to a certain person. It's not named who the person is. It's one of the rare times that we're given this kind of open-ended possibility, a certain person. Thanks for being specific, Jesus, of the 3 million people in Jerusalem. Right? Go into a city for a certain person and say to him, my time is at hand. I will keep the Passover at your house with my disciples. A certain person. Maybe that was the innkeeper. Maybe Jesus and his disciples celebrated what we will celebrate here in a few minutes at the house of the innkeeper. I like to hope so. I like to dream that maybe when they were in the room breaking bread, drinking the wine together, maybe the innkeeper was standing at the door watching them. And maybe that was the very same room where he and his friend had the conversation. I like to dream that the innkeeper heard Jesus say something about this represents my body, and heard him then say something about, and this cup represents the forgiveness for all people. And the innkeeper thought, I wonder if all means all. And if it does, it also means me. And maybe even in my dream, the innkeeper began, somewhat overwhelmed, of course, wouldn't you be, began to shed a couple tears. The first tear was a tear of guilt. Guilt that he did what he did, that he had not done what he should have, what he could have had he been a little more generous, had he slowed down just a little bit, that he had not given Mary a room or a place to stay. That tear of guilt, realizing that every choice we make has consequences. It does. But then the second tear was one of gratitude. Gratitude that even though choices have consequences, even though guilt is real, there is forgiveness. Gratitude that the innkeeper knew his past need not dictate his future. His past need not dictate his future. Maybe a tear of gratitude because somehow the innkeeper got what you get, that the birth of this baby was not just about the birth of another baby. It was about the birth of hope. Hope that every time someone is accepted for who they are and enabled to be all they can. Hope that whenever the hungry are fed, or the homeless are sheltered, or the naked are clothed. Hope for any time that public needs trump private greed. Hope that people are comforted and embraced, that wounds are healed and loved ones are reconciled. Maybe when the innkeeper was standing there watching these events happen, the breaking of the bread and the pouring of the wine, he shed these tears, a tear of guilt, but also a tear of gratitude. Well, like I say, that's my dream for the innkeeper. I hope you like it. But above all, it seems to me a good reminder. A reminder that there is always, always, always more forgiveness in God than there is sin in us. There is always, regardless of the choices we've made, regardless of the opportunities we have taken and those that we should have taken, the words we've said, the actions we've done, there is always more forgiveness in God than there is sin in us. Amen.